Historical fiction is one of the best genres to transport you to an entirely different time period, allowing you to follow fictional characters while also discovering what it would have been like to live during a different time and even gain insight into significant historical events. One thing that remains the same no matter what time period your book takes place, and one reason I love reading so much, is human emotion. Some of the most profoundly moving books I've ever read have been historical fiction, and in today's video I'm going to share some of my absolute favorite historical fiction novels and what I would consider must-reads for any historical fiction fan or anyone looking to get into historical fiction. At the end of the video, I'm also going to be sharing my 5-star historical fiction predictions. So these are historical fiction novels that are on my TBR that I predict will be 5-star reads for me and that I am the most excited to get to, and a few of them are new releases. All of these books will be linked in my Amazon storefront, but I always encourage you guys to shop at your local bookstores if you can, or use your local library. So we've got a massive stack of historical fiction books that we're gonna go through, so let's dive in. We'll get the two most basic historical fiction picks out of the way because I cannot do this video without recommending these to you, especially if you're new to historical fiction or you're new to reading in general. All Light We Cannot See by Anthony Dower. This book I read years and years ago. I talk about it quite often. I'm definitely due for a reread. It is set in World War II and we follow a young blind girl who lives in Paris. Her father has basically made her an entire 3D replica of the part of the city that they live in, and that's how she's able to navigate. War strikes and you're following her as she is trying to escape the city with her father. And there's dual perspectives. You're also following a young German boy and their storylines come together, and it's just such a beautiful, heartbreaking story. And then of course we cannot talk about historical fiction without talking about Kristen Hannah. This book takes place in France in World War II. It follows two sisters and it's just such an empowering story about women, and also just like such an emotional, gut-wrenching story. And if you are not mentally prepared to sob your eyes out, maybe hold off until you are, because this book will definitely break your heart. The Tattooist of Auschwitz. This book is so devastating. I'm 99% sure that it is based on a true story, and actually one of my followers on Instagram let me know that there is a second book in the series, which I'll put up on the screen as well, which I have not read, but it is on my TBR. It gives you so much insight into what it was like and what the camps were like and what reality was like, and it is hard to read. It's really hard to read, but it is a book that I have always thought about since I read it, and I highly recommend it if you are into historical fiction. Next up, we have one that's a little bit more of a love story. So The Stationery Shop takes place in, I believe, 1953 Tehran during political upheaval, and you're following our main character Roya as she is reflecting on her childhood and her romance with a young boy at the time. She is now living in, I believe, in America and is married to someone else. So you're kind of getting a dual timeline, but the stories do come together at the end. And when I tell you, I vividly remember reading the end of this book on my couch when I was living in Ormond Beach, Florida, and just sobbing. It was like 1 a.m. It just tears you apart, but it's in the most cathartic way, and it just really makes you think about love and think about relationships. Then if you want a little bit lighter of a historical fiction novel, I don't even know if this is classified realistically as historical fiction, because I think historical fiction has to be within the last 50 years, but I've seen a few other people talk about this as though it's historical fiction, and I feel like if you are someone who is new to reading or new to reading historical fiction or looking to get out of a reading slump, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, if you haven't heard about it, that would be insane, but maybe you haven't because you're new to the reading space, I don't know. But this book follows a young writer, and she basically takes a job to help this famous actress write her memoir and recount her life and the 7 husbands that she's had, and basically this is going to be basically a tell-all of her life and the 7 husbands that she had. And there's also a very interesting underlying mystery throughout the story, and it's just, Taylor Jenkins Reid has a way of delivering one-liners and little insights and things that just make you stop and feel like, okay, this is a feeling that I've had, and then here it is put into words that I wouldn't have otherwise thought of. Then we have Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I'm recommending this to you as if I've read it, but I'm currently reading it and I'm only on page 53, but so far It's so good. So many of you guys on Instagram recommended this to me, and it's been sitting on my shelf for well over a year. I just haven't gotten around to it. This takes place in 1580 in England, and it follows Shakespeare's family. Shakespeare himself is never named in the book, but he does obviously play a role. It is about his family, but the focus is on his wife and his children, namely his son Hamnet, which inspired Hamlet, I believe. Overall, their writing is just so poetic, and it really feels like a spring or summer morning to me while I'm reading this. I know it's going to be devastating. I know it's going to be heartbreaking. It's set during the time when the Black Death is taking people's lives, and so obviously like this probably isn't gonna have a super happy ending. It's just so vibrant and so alive, and I cannot get enough of it. I want to read it slowly to savor it, but I also just really want to know what's gonna happen. I'm finding it very interesting and very well written. Okay, next up we're gonna move into the historical fiction books that are on my TBR and that I am predicting are gonna be 5-star reads for me. First up we have Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This one has been on my shelf for over a year. It was gifted to me, and I have every intention of reading it, but I just keep putting it off because I know I'm gonna love it, or I think I'm really gonna love it. But this is a multi-generational story about a family living in Korea, and to be honest, I don't know much more about it beyond that. It says, in the early 1900s, teenage Sunja, the adored daughter of a crippled fisherman, falls for a wealthy stranger at the seashore near her home in Korea. Promises her the world, but when she discovers she is pregnant and that her lover is married, she refuses to be bought. Instead, she accepts an offer of marriage from a gentle, sickly minister passing through on his way to Japan. But her decision to abandon her home and to reject her son's powerful father sets off a dramatic saga that will echo down through the generations. So this just sounds so good, and I'm so excited. I also just think the cover is stunning, and I can't wait to read it. Next up we have The Mayor of Maxwell Street by Avery Cunningham. This was a book of the month pick from February, and the first thing that drew me to it was the fact that it is set in the 1920s during Prohibition, and I think in Chicago. So it just sounds like so good. So basically our main character is working as an undercover journalist, and she's basically trying to take down a mob boss from my understanding, but there's way more to the story, and I just cannot wait to dive in, and I honestly need to pick this one up like tomorrow. Then of course we have The Women by Kristen Hanna. This was also a book of the month pick for February, and I went to Kristen Hanna's author event for the release of this book in January, and when I say Kristen Hanna, I mean, I have loved her writing, but seeing her in person and seeing her and her friend who was the one interviewing her talking about her experience as a writer, her experience writing this book, answering questions, she is just such a cool person, and it was so cool to listen to her talk about how she got started writing and her relationship with her friend. They had the best friend banter I have ever seen in my life. They were actually hilarious. I was cracking up the entire time, and it just made me, I left feeling inspired to write and to read more of her books, and it was like seriously incredible. If you ever have the chance to go to one of Kristen Hanna's author events, definitely take it, snatch it up, because she's incredible. But this book, The Women, is her newest release, and it basically follows the women who were the nurses during the Vietnam War, and it really touches on stories that aren't talked about enough. And my friend from Bookstagram actually just read it, and she was like, bro, like you need to read this now. It is so good. So it's definitely, I'm predicting it's gonna be a 5-star read for me. I've sneakily read some excerpts from it just because I'm like so ready to dive in, but I'm currently reading Hamnet. I know there are probably a million historical fiction novels that I did not talk about, and I would love to hear your guys' favorite ever historical fiction novels, because I would love to add your recommendations to my TBR, because I'm always looking for new book recommendations. If you guys want to see if my 5-star predictions end up being 5 stars, be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss another video, and hit that like button. And until next time, I will see you next time.